Hello and welcome to the Gifted Ed Podcast. We are your hosts,
Angel Van Howe, Social Emotional Facilitator and Gifted Coordinator,
and Meghan McCarthy, Social Worker. We are grateful for the opportunity to share this space with you today as we talk about the complexities of giftedness with our very own Kristen Teague. Kristen's wealth of knowledge and experience has come from the perspectives gained through being a classroom teacher, lower school head, and now our Interim Director of Enrollment. Welcome to the Gifted Ed Podcast, Kristen.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Kristen, we thought a great way to get started today with our conversation is to review some of the signs of a gifted child. So I'll start off by saying early language development, when we use advanced vocabulary and language, reading at an early age without any formal teaching, excellent memory, persistent curiosity, and rapid learning.
A few other ones include creativity and thinking, so thinking outside the box, highly developed sense of humor, so recognizes and applies humor at a very early age. Another really important one is compassion and exhibiting an intuitive nature. And lastly, keen powers of observation, so considers multiple perspectives and holding them at the same time.
And as many of you know, a lot of these children demonstrate or show the characteristics of emotional intensity. They're very passionate about things and have high sensitivities regarding feelings and situations. They also have a tendency to have a preference for older playmates. Perfectionism tends to be a theme with many children who have gifted characteristics. They're very hard on themselves and they expect a lot of themselves. And then lastly, one of the characteristics we're going to mention today is they tend to have a long attention span and be very persistent in pursuing their interests and goals. So that having been said, as we were going through these 12 characteristics of giftedness, what happened is I started thinking about the complexity and the messiness that is giftedness. And the reason is while we have these 12 characteristics, there are also many other characteristics of giftedness. And some children display many of these characteristics. Others only display a few of them, but quite intensely. And that has led to a lot of reflection and thinking on the parts of all of us that work with students who are gifted on how to best meet their needs and how to identify them as gifted when they don't all show the same characteristics at all times.
And I think that is such an important point, just that you don't have to exhibit all of them at the same time or with the similar intensities. Mm-hmm. But given your role as Director of Enrollment, what is commonly overlooked when reflecting on these signs?
Sure. What I see when families come to us at ACS is many times they are either just figuring out or starting to recognize that their child might be gifted. And so some of these signs are familiar to them when I speak of them, or they'll shake their head, they'll agree, it kind of resonates with them. But what I think is really overlooked in terms of their point of view is they're coming to us for answers. So they say, well, great, my child demonstrates these characteristics. What do I do now? I don't know what to do. So first of all, they feel relief that someone can relate to what they're explaining about their child. But then the next part, I always acknowledge with them that it is complicated and messy, and sometimes that results in them emoting. And giving them permission to say that this is not easy. Mm-hmm. A lot of times families will come in and share that, oh, well, your child's gifted, that must be easy. And I'm like, well, the exact opposite is true. It's very complicated, it's complex, and there's a whole set of needs, not only for children who are gifted, but for your particular child that are going to need to be met. And it is not black and white. It's very gray and it's messy. But we're here to meet their needs. And then I start talking about the things that the Avery Coonley School offers that are in line with best practices for meeting the needs of gifted learners. Then they're pretty interested.
So it seems like when you're meeting with families, there's a lot of misconceptions and judgments that we have about giftedness that we all hold. You kind of have to address and work through before moving forward to what do we do now?
Exactly. And I think part of the skill of working in the enrollment office is acknowledging that and helping them recognize what the misconceptions are and helping them know that it is okay that they're in this place and that there are things that can be done and that hopefully we can meet their needs at the Avery Coonley School. But if they don't feel comfortable at the Avery Coonley School, or they go through the admission process, or at any point they decide, my instincts are telling me this is not the place for my child, then I also help direct them in other directions, because it's not about the Avery Coonley School per se. It's about meeting the needs of gifted learners. And I have to coach parents on having them trust their instincts about what is right for their child. And if it's not us, it needs to be somewhere, because there is an urgency tied to meeting the needs of a child who's truly gifted.
So what are the vulnerabilities that accompany that sense of urgency?
Sure. One thing that I feel like parents don't necessarily understand is that giftedness in children renders them vulnerable. And so the urgency is that at a very young age, you want them to be in a learning environment where they are exposed to opportunities that they do not know how to solve or do not know the answers to. Because often these are the children who know the answers, who are the first to raise their hands. And I always explain that at the Avery Coonley School, it is our job to make sure that your child comes to school every day and knows how to not do something. And that is because we're putting them in an environment that is safe, where risk-taking is valued and supported. And we want them to fail often and fail now at a young age, where they have the supports to deal with it, rather than waiting until they're 15 and experiencing that for the first time and having no coping skills.
Right.
And that's the urgency.
Yeah, that makes sense, because how do they learn a growth mindset?
That's
when
correct.
They're 15?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why I try to explain to them that at 15, oftentimes it's too late.
Right.
Or else you have a lot of backtracking to do. Your child didn't just suddenly exhibit these gifted characteristics at age 15. They had them when they were 3, 4, 2. And so helping parents understand that, well, we can wait another year, or we're going to try our public school for a year. If they're actually meeting the needs of your gifted learner, that is absolutely fine, and that needs to happen. But more than likely, they're probably not. And so helping them understand the sense of urgency of working with it now.
Can you touch on a little bit potentialities and talent development for us?
Sure. So obviously, children who have many of these characteristics and are gifted have potentialities. And I sort of liken it to, if your child is an athlete, parents will often have them have private coaching, and will sign them up for advanced leagues and travel teams. And they'll just keep going because they know their child has that potential. But I find that oftentimes parents who have children of gifted don't necessarily recognize that and start nurturing that. And those potentialities are every bit as important to develop as any other gift that a child may have. And if they're not developed, then they're just sitting there. So if this is a bit extreme, but if you had a broken arm, you wouldn't let it just sit there. Mm-hmm. You would want to receive medical attention. You would want to have a protocol. You would want specialists to be involved to help your child heal from that injury and move forward. And the same is true for children who are gifted. Those talents, if they're not developed or identified, as well as their weaknesses, those children are not receiving supports in those areas. And when things are left untouched or unrecognized, things start to happen that may not be positive.
That makes a lot of sense. What would you suggest that we do about it in terms of helping parents and community members understand that sense of urgency?
Well, I think doing things like this podcast and trying to make it more public is a start. I think also having everybody read various articles and things about giftedness and just becoming more aware of what's out there.
I think just reflecting on what you were saying earlier, I think the power of just trusting your instinct as a parent, because I think all parents kind of look at their kids and wonder, like, is this normal? Is this not normal? And I think that must be a difficult thing to stick with as a parent, but important thing to keep exploring.
And I feel like they sometimes they may have reached out and tried to find someone who can help them, but they oftentimes have not found that. And so even if we can serve as a sounding board or a resource, whether they go to school here or not, and I think that's maybe one of our future goals, is to serve as a place where people know to go to when they start recognizing these characteristics in their family members or their children.
Just one last piece. I know we're starting to wrap up, but I think just coming out from my lens as a social worker, I see such power in just the being understood. So the earlier a child better understands how they operate, and how much earlier the teachers and the family around that child can better understand, to have that understanding while going through the stages of development, childhood, and then into adolescence, I think can be such a powerful piece when you're looking at it from the social emotional lens, and giving that sense of there's academic urgency and with the talents, but also just from that social emotional piece of just the power of being understood and understanding yourself, or starting to understand yourself at a young age.
And understanding that there are others like you that share similar characteristics, where you can connect with peers, not only chronologically, but intellectually and emotionally.
I think one of the things that Avery Coonley does well is we provide them with an environment to be with their like-minded peers or mutually talented peers. And because of the social emotional supports that we have in place and the initiatives that the two of you have made sure that are happening consistently in our program, our students develop an awareness of their own relative strengths and weaknesses and learn to advocate for themselves. And I think ultimately that's the goal. But when families are first coming here, I just feel that they don't know what to do. And so that's the starting point. And then the end point is having a child who can celebrate their relative strengths and weaknesses and knows how to advocate for themselves and what's going to work and not work for them.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kristen.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
We want to thank you for joining us today in this space. Please subscribe to the Gifted Ed podcast to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Stay tuned for our next episode that continues to unpack the complexities of giftedness.